The call, Tracy Martin.
Speaker, just before I begin into the substance of my contribution, can I just pick up on a comment that Dr. Nick Smith said? He said that a budget was about choice, and I would agree with him. Every budget is about choice. One prioritises what is important to whether it be a company or a family household budget, a government's budget, for example. So it's worthy of note that this government chose to prioritise $25 million for a flag referendum that nobody actually wants, but chose to make orphans and unsupported children wait until 2018, Mr McIndoe, for the clothing allowance. So that's what this government's choices that it made. It decided that a $25 million flag referendum that 84 to 90% of New Zealand doesn't want, but it's their money, was more important than providing clothing allowance for orphans and unsupported children being raised by kin carers. So I agree with Dr. Nick Smith. They made choices, and the choices they will be judged by. Now, I think probably the first thing we've got here, and obviously Mr Finlayson doesn't like my contribution either, getting snarky there, Mr Finlayson. If one wants to put this budget into context, Mr Speaker, one actually has to look at the last 6 budgets, because I would say, I'm going to hedge some bets here and say that the National Party has actually had a really clever strategy over the last 6 years coming into this year's budget. And I think we can see it by the cuts that were made in 2009, between 2009 to 2012. And just an example, Mr Speaker, would be the choices that were made way back in 2009. So back in 2009, this government wiped $400 million out of early childhood education. They wiped it in a budget back in 2009, $400 million out of early childhood education. In this budget, they have provided $75 million over the next 4 years. How lovely. That's great. But it doesn't anywhere near go the amounts that they withdrew. Let's have a talk about the training incentive allowance. The training incentive allowance that this government removed from single-parent students, and that had a value of approximately $4,500 a year. And in this budget, single-parent family students will get $25 a week. That's lovely. That's about $1,000. So take away and let the people stay out there under hardship just long enough so that when you throw them some crumbs, they're incredibly grateful. It's a brilliant plan, and this government has done it very, very well over the last 6 years, because it's they announce and these incremental positives they keep announcing, hoping all the time that the New Zealand public won't remember the negatives. Thank goodness that New Zealand First is here to actually remind them. I think the other thing we have seen in recent days, and it's around education, it's around some new schools that are being built. That's wonderful. You have to build new schools when you've got a huge number of people coming into the country, net migration. Their children deserve an education like everybody else's children, and so therefore you have to increase the education budget to build new schools. Seems sensible. It's unfortunate when one member of the government doesn't know that a school is going to be shifted inside his own electorate and actually has to go and ask the minister of his own government, of which he is he's a member outside of cabinet, a minister himself, but nobody bothered to tell him that a kura inside his electorate was going to be shifted from where it is now, under this budget, to a camping ground inside his electorate. So he has to go public and he has to actually ask in a public fashion, can I please know what my own government's doing, what my own party's doing? I think that would show that the left hand doesn't quite know what the right hand's doing. There's obviously some people who are on the in and some people are on the out. Perhaps that is punishment for that particular minister for the advice he gave around Nova Pay. It was that minister who gave advice to Hikia Parata that it's fine, go with Nova Pay. No, they didn't meet their KPIs. No, they didn't. And yes, there are about 147 glitches still in it, and no, we haven't run a trial, but I'm advising you, go ahead, Minister, let's roll it out. So now let's take that, Nova Pay. $53 million inside this budget for the continuation of trying to fix a lemon called NovaPay. The increase to the operations grant for state schools inside this budget over the next 4 years is $42 million. That equates to about $10.7 million per year for the next 4 years on top of for the operations grant increase for state schools, around about 1%. Power's increased by 3.6% in the same time frame, but that's about 1%. NovaPay is going to get $53 million inside this budget. State schools will get 42. You don't have to be very bright to figure out the math. You don't, and that's probably why it kind of works over there for the government. So it's an interesting budget, Mr. Speaker, because you have to drill down past the spin and the rhetoric and the marketing dollars that have been put here and actually have a look across the last 6 years at what this budget does. Now, here's another thing. This is another press release from the Minister of Education. It's about $62.9 million of operating funding over the next 4 years. Now, $39.5 million is going to go to provide ongoing resource scheme OARS support for about 500 extra students. And that's lovely. There's more students, of course. There's more students inside our schools. That's why we're building 2 more schools. So actually, it's not more support for current students. It's actually an increase in budget because we've got more students. The next thing we've got is this is going to pay for specialists such as speech language therapists, psychologists, physiotherapists and occupational therapists. That'd be brilliant, brilliant, except we haven't got enough of them. We haven't got enough of them, Mr. Speaker, because support has been withdrawn from our student body, from our tertiary education provision, and these are not target areas. And we now have a shortage through that sort of withdrawal of support and bad workforce planning. We don't have enough speech language therapists when schools call for them. We don't have enough psychologists. And so when schools reach out trying to help the young people inside their schools, because now we've got a wraparound service and the RTLBs have all been shifted off into goodness knows where, now when schools reach out for psychologists, for example, you can't get one to show up. You have organisations like Marinoto, and I am not being flippant, you have organisations like Marinoto telling schools that unless this child has a rope around its neck, don't call them. That's how bad it is out there, Mr. Speaker. That's how bad it is. That's how short-staffed we are. And supposedly, however, this budget's going to fix it. $23.3 million for extra in-class teacher aid support for 1,500 students, special needs education such as dyslexia. The Dyslexia Foundation tells us that there are up to 70,000 school children who actually are affected by dyslexia, 1 in 10 New Zealanders, and this funding is going to help 1,500 students. This once-over lightly sprinkle of assistance devalues the need that is out there. It's crumbs from a quite well-laden table when you have a look at the priorities that this government has decided. There's absolutely nothing inside this budget for the professional development for early recognition of dyslexia, dyspraxia or Asperger's when those students show up at school. There's absolutely nothing inside of this budget to provide extra support inside early childhood and early identification and professional development. There is absolutely nothing inside of this budget. In 2009, the gifted and talented funding was taken away, Mr. McIndoe. In 2009, the advisory groups were disbanded. In 2009, targeting funding for innovative programs around talent development initiatives were abandoned. There is nothing inside this report for gifted and talented children. Where's the tagged funding for gifted and talented children? This government that came in saying it had aspirational goals for our students removed well above from national standards. Now, I don't even like national standards, but how aspirational is it that apparently no longer anybody's going to be well above? You're either well below, at, or above, but there's nothing for gifted and talented. And again, nothing for gifted and talented inside this budget. So, Mr. Speaker, I could go on. I've got a few more minutes. I will go on. The reality of this budget and 6 years' worth of work by this government is a shift of the cost around our free-to-the-end user primary and secondary education. It's now being passed on to our parents. This is what is the reality of this government's budgets over the last 6 years. And if parents want to go and have a look, And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, they freeze the parental threshold allowance where students can actually get some assistance so they can eat. It's a very interesting budget, people. Drill down into it. Kia ora.
The Honourable